This is the last talk of the afternoon. You guys already had a whole day of learning about chatbots, voice bots, all the technology, all the tools. But really, we're going to wrap it up today and really focus on how to go from an idea, zero to launch, in the most efficient way possible. I think one thing probably all of us have seen up here is large enterprises. They have an idea, they want to do something. It's a very good use case, but it gets caught up in maybe bureaucracy or trying to pick technologies, and they fail to launch, or it takes them something that could have been a month or 2 months, takes them a year to launch, and we've all probably seen that. So the focus of today's talk is going to be like how to go from zero to launch. And I'm going to stand here, hopefully I don't fall off the stage. Okay, so we're going to do a quick intro of everybody on the panel, and then we'll get into the questions.
Rob Lubo with Bot Copy.
Joe Huang with Oracle.
Nikhil Vimal with BotMock.
Ravi Raj, CEO and co-founder of Passage AI.
Sergey Burkov, co-founder and CEO of Altera.ai.
Tina Huang, co-founder and CTO of Transposit.
Okay, so to go back to the first question, and really the essence of this talk is, like, how do you go from an idea to an MVP, and what are like the first steps that you have to take before you can really start picking technology or building anything? Like, what are the first steps to go from an idea to an MVP?
I can go first. I think it starts with the use case. It could be customer service, IT help desk, conversational commerce. So first identifying the use case, and essentially, and the use case has to be conversational by definition. And then, getting all the content you need to respond to the user or the customer. And then typically in our industry, we recommend starting with something really simple, like an order tracking chatbot. So you start really simple, see how people use it. You might find that customers are asking, different types of questions, in which case you can expand the chatbot to accommodate that.
I think real quickly, sometimes when we build a chatbot, especially early on in the early years, it was a solution in search of a problem. Build a chatbot if it's the only thing that will solve the problem. If some other kind of app or widget or web functionality can solve it, great. If that doesn't work and it escalates to a human and the human can solve it and you're happy with that, great. But if you think a chatbot can slide in there and solve a problem, that's when you build it, and not before.
So for us, it's a little bit different because we have both a platform to help build chatbot. So we have a platform. But also we ship a bunch of out-of-the-box chatbot for HCM, for human capital management, for services and things like that. But we work with a lot of customers to kind of take and build the chatbot. What we typically start with them is to identify the use cases. A lot of times their focus areas, for example, one of the most common use cases is for our service customers. So customer contact center want to divert some of the calls to chat our digital system. So we direct them to, okay, look at these common use cases that are good for offloading these live chat. And then what we do is we take each one of those customers through a journey of what we call a conversation design workshop. So each one of them, we went through, okay, what are the key personas, what are the key business problems that you're trying to solve, and then identify and create a conversation flow based on that. So for our perspective, it's not so much we build a chatbot based on that, but we help our customer going through that process to build their chatbot to a fruition.
Okay, so a lot of you probably in your enterprise, you guys have designers, developers, UX people, copywriters. You have resources to hire new people. So when you guys work with clients or you guys build bots, like, who do you pull in from other departments? How do you identify some of these skills? Or if you're going to hire somebody, like, what types of people are you looking for?
So conversation design is a very different area, right? So you can't just say, okay, yeah, graphical user interface designer suddenly become a conversation designer. What we do actually is, again, with our customer, the starting point is always the line business users who knows their customer the best, right? You start with them and you have them to help you design a conversation. Now, that may not be the final conversation, but it's a general flow. Then what you want to do is bring in a conversation designer. And this, we do have now a conversational user interface designer. I think some of them were in last year's conference to really provide the best practices on how to handle, for example, there's an earlier question on how do you handle, when you start with a chatbot, you have a very small number of intent you can handle. How do you handle that? Well, the solution is best practice is start with building an intent for unresolved intent. You start with that. So there are a lot of these use cases that these best practices that a conversation designer can help to build. Actually, in our customers, what we're starting to see are these conversation, how should I say it, conversation developers or conversation architects that are emerging in these customers. And so we're really seeing them working in tandem with business users to build these chatbots.
So, boo boo boo. Boo 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 boo. Yeah, so I think the first person should be the strong product manager, somebody who will understand what you are building and basically formulate the task. And if it is a startup, that typically it's you, the CEO, the founder of the startup is typically the product manager. You don't need a dedicated, separate product manager. If it is inside the company, that it should be somebody who kind of takes charge of the bot, will be the bot father. So this is the first most important person, and he or she should also figure out where to get training data and how to sell it to the clients and whatnot. And the second important person is the engineer. And so if we are talking about a bot with at least some brains, not just IVR-like buttons, but you want to use some form of machine learning, even level 2, then you need somebody who knows machine learning. You need a strong engineer, well, ideally from Google or something like that. And all these machine learning tools that have been open sourced are still pretty finicky and require skill to use them and train them. And so you need like a PhD in computer science or a Googler or people from Facebook AI. And so that's two most important person.
I think it starts with the use case again. So let's say the use case is customer service. I would start with talking to folks in the customer service team, the head of customer service, identify the top, let's say 10 issues that account for most of your incoming calls. Start with that, and then the second would be to hire machine learning engineers because the accuracy and the NLP is really important. If you have a chatbot that is not accurate, responds incorrectly to the customer's questions, it's actually going to be counterproductive. So I would start with hiring machine learning engineers, full stack engineers if you have to connect to different platforms, and finally conversation designers. That's a really key aspect of the chatbot.
One insight might be helpful. There's a lot of out-of-work copywriters who have 10 or 20 years of experience, and they're just phenomenal writers, real pros. And you could get them cheap. And find the ones that are really geeky and tech-savvy as well. So they're copywriters, but they're science geeks on the side. Sit them next to somebody who knows how to use Dialogflow. So this person is less creative, but they're more UX-oriented and can actually do a little bit of development. And that team, those two people, can make a really great chatbot. If they go to Chatbot's Life and they look at the articles there, follow the steps, they can get into a lot of trouble in a good way.
Yeah, I'll just add a little piece there that we talk a lot about conversational designers, and actually chatbots are new, but things like SMS and voice are not. And so you definitely look for people who have skill set designing old SMS interfaces. That can often be a good place to find that kind of resource.
I'll add very quickly here that I think on the side of the product manager, it needs to be being able to split up those different roles as well, right, with voice and text, and being able to recognize those things, ideally with the help of a conversation designer. So, even for a certain use case, I think bringing it all together is really the key thing, and a product person can usually start that off, and a conversational designer can take that, then the engineers, you can sort of funnel that down a few different ways, but yeah.
Okay, great tips, on building your team. So you have your initial idea, you have your team. So now how do you actually get it to where you start designing the conversations and then take it one step further to actually build something and get it live? What tools or what frameworks do you use to start designing the conversations and then also get it live?
So we actually did a lot of this. We would make these maps. Dustin and I, when we were presenting, we showed a quick glimpse of a very small map. But anything that you can use to draw boxes and lines and arrows, start mapping out the architecture. At that time, we were using Miro, which was real-time board. But now, technologies like Bot Society and Botmark are fantastic for kind of mapping out the beginnings of a bot.
Yeah, I think taking the step before really jumping into anything, before you really got to line up your testing, in terms of conceptual frameworks, I think validation, as you would with many other MVPs or products that you're building, is super key. And obviously, I think the first step is the mapping part, and even after that, being able to identify the best metrics that you're going to go through, and identifying, and that does depend on the use case, of course, but being able to put that on paper, being able to also visualize that the best you can, and see what you can do before you even start building, before you touch a line of code, is a very, very crucial step in the process.
You have to know your KPIs and build your flows towards those KPIs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without that, you're blind.
I think as with any product, you start with the customer and work backwards. So you identify the customer problem and then find a technology solution that solves that problem. So it starts with that. And then typically what we recommend is you prototype the bot before you add machine learning. It can be all canned and robotic, but if you prototype it, then you can get users to actually use it and give you feedback. Is it really useful? Is it solving a problem? And you can use a number of tools for that. And thirdly, once you have launched it, look at the metrics, look at the analytics, look at customer satisfaction, and then iterate a lot. Improve the machine learning algorithms, add more intents as people start using it. So, iterations are a really important part of bot building.
Yes, I agree. Iterations are very important. So you prepare your training corpus, your kind of intense standard answers, and you think that you thought of everything, but of course you would be always wrong, that the reality, it never fits your plans. So half of the intents that you define will not be used. People don't give a damn about them. However, the other, there will be another, 100 intents that you didn't think about at the planning stage. So you have to check the chat logs and see what people is actually asking, and quickly update your corpus training set, everything, use cases, to be able for the bot to answer the questions that are frequently asked, not those that you thought would be important.
Yeah, I think that, I'm a little bit biased because at Transposit we build a platform to make it easier to talk to APIs. But I think going back to this message, being able to quickly iterate and prototype on the functionality of the bot, somewhat independent of the machine learning around conversational understanding, is how you can sort of separate out those two pieces. Because I think there's the can you understand what someone's saying to the bot, but then also like is your bot actually able to do useful tasks that provide real value? And the faster you can get a prototype out there and get metrics and feedback, the better.
Okay, great tips. So we skipped ahead a little bit on this question, and I think a lot of us already do this internally when we're excited about a project and we want to get it launched. And we see this a lot as how do you get this through compliance? How do you deal with security? How do you deal with GDPR? How do you deal with the concerns from VPs about customer data and conversation history and stuff like that? Do you guys have any tips for navigating that kind of internal compliance?
Yeah, I do. I think having a approval workflow is super powerful, especially with all these things coming up. I think that is, it's almost basically key now, I think, to have some sort of process where you can, even in that iteration process, even in that very early process, thinking about those things earlier than later is probably the safer bet today. So I see that as, that's each company will develop its own, each use case will develop its own, but just like standardizing that throughout everybody who's involved after you have that team ready can be a really, really crucial piece here.
So I'm going to be maybe a little biased, but I shouldn't say that. But you probably want to start with a platform that's certified with, that has a clear stand around, for example, GDPR and FedRAMP and different standard. And also the other things to realize is that while the platform give you a path to say how to be compliant with give you the tool to be GDPR compliant, for example, you still have to design your digital system or bot to be GDPR compliant. So there is, so it doesn't completely remove the need to understand what those requirements are. But if you're looking for, let's say, we're in platform business, if someone's looking for a platform, what we would help them to do is guide them through the process of what those issues are, and making sure that when they design their chatbot, they understand what facilities are in the platform to help them to be GDPR compliant. Yes, you can remove or give the user option to remove conversation history. How do they then deal with analytics and things like that? So that's...
Yeah, I think it starts with data privacy. When you're dealing with personally identifiable information, that data has to be completely secure. Otherwise, you lose the trust of the customer. So, for example, if you take a use case like a loan application and you ask for a person's social security number, clearly that has to be kept extremely secure and private. There are compliance, things like GDPR, which are all part of this. Another one from a regulation perspective is, in situations like healthcare, or even while you're driving, talking to the car and saying the check engine light is on, and the chatbot tells you what the problem could be. Their accuracy is really important, and maybe disclaimers are fairly important. One use case in healthcare is diagnosing a problem by asking you your symptoms. Clearly, that has to perform at 100% accuracy. And you need to have disclaimers saying that it could be this condition, why don't you make an appointment with a doctor, things like that.
Okay.
This might be useful. Unlike old school pieces of marketing, you can't just hand it off to the lawyers and say, approve this, or you can't just hand it off. Bots are very complex. They're labyrinths of content, and they need to change on the fly very quickly. So how do you do that? We were talking to some huge banks, and they were running into issues about how do we approve every single response. With our lawyers, it takes forever. And you need to be fluid and nimble if you want to have a good bot. So, when you think of customer service people, not every word they say is approved by lawyers. You talk to a support person at Apple, they're kind of winging it. They might throw out an analogy or something to help you because they're authorized to do that. So your chatbot writers should be authorized to use their discretion within certain confines, but maybe let go of this idea of approving every single letter because it's just not tenable.
Very good points, very good points. Okay, so now your bot's live. Describe kind of how your iteration process of looking at analytics, how to improve the bot over time. What does that kind of look like for you guys, like in the first months of the bot being live?
So again, I'll just speak from a platform perspective. One of the things that we always tell our customer is you start with a limited number of intents and then roll it out to the customer to a limited number of users, and then use the analytics features that look at, for example, what are the top unresolved intent, top unresolved utterances, and use the whatever facility. Obviously, work with a platform has a facility, but there are a lot of analytics companies, bioanalytics companies can also help you with that, which is identify which are these top unresolved utterances, and then allow human to train to say, okay, this utterance actually maps to that particular intent. But something we do also recommend is not letting the chatbot to self-learn. Because it could easily be abused or be mistrained by unintended users. So always use a supervised learning and human learning to look at these analytics data and then iteratively train the digital assistant, adding more utterances to each of the intent and iterate through that.
I'll add something quickly there. I totally agree with that. I think that with conversation design never stops, basically. When you see those analytics, when you see those messages coming in, where the most frustrations are, where the most confusion is, you got to keep iterating on that process. And I think the maintenance of conversation design is becoming ever more important now as projects are expanding, as the use cases are getting more serious, beyond just a simple customer support thing, especially if you're going for those more complex things. So considering that you might have to iterate a little bit even after the initial piece is something that you just have to move forward with and realize how crucial that can be in the long run for satisfaction and utility as well.
Yeah, definitely agree that analytics are really important. You get to see how users are using it. For example, we report a sentiment of every message and the average sentiment of users that day, and that can be used as a proxy for customer satisfaction. So looking at how the bot is being used, seeing messages that went to a live agent, because that will give you ideas to further automate using AI. And then the customer satisfaction piece I mentioned. And then when the bot is launched, it's not going to be 100% accurate. There will be some NLP accuracy issues, but that could actually be a teachable moment or a trainable moment, if you will, where you can actually take those exact same messages, label them, and use that as training data and improve the bot further.
Yeah, and as we talk all about measuring analytics for your chatbots, I think it's also important that chatbots don't live in isolation of your greater business ecosystem. So make sure that whatever KPI that your bot is really trying to address, that you're also tracking that metric as well to see the validity of your bot.
Yes, so unlike the website or mobile app, the chatbot still need to be developed after launch. Because if it has machine learning, if it is not just AVR, if it has machine learning, then it has to learn from new examples, from new data points, and the chatbots don't do it by themselves. You need somebody who will teach the bot. So you need the person who teaches the bot for a long time after launch. You have to be ready for that.
Okay, so I think that wraps up our talk. We touched from how to conceptualize, how to go live. Hopefully that's very useful for you guys, and you can bring that into your enterprise and you don't spend years trying to get an idea out there. And I think we're going to go to questions.
Hi. So you have mentioned about authorization. I actually didn't follow. Is it restricted to the backend system which we integrate, or can we do something at the language level? What are your thoughts on that? On the authorization?
So I just want to understand, make sure we understand the question. So basically, authorization, right? Authorization in terms of connecting Chatbot with the enterprise security. Is that kind of yeah. So actually, that's pretty important. Actually, that's one of the key, the first requirement, at least for us, is to be able to integrate Chatbot security with the enterprise security. But the enterprise, but typically the authorization and the user would need to come from the backend application. Because what you want to make sure is the Chatbot can access the same, the user who use the Chatbot to access information has the same access level as the actual user, the backend system, because enterprise application has data access controls and things like that. So it's important to be able to integrate and leverage and use the backend application security for your Chatbot to prevent having, Chatbot user can see all of the data, whereas that user is actually authorized just to see part of the data. I think that's I hope that's the question.
Yeah, if it's about authentication, like logging in a user and then providing personal information, there's actually a feature that most messaging platforms support called account linking. So you can use that feature and use the customer's OAuth system or authentication system to log in the user.
So one of the important things, so one of the important things while building the chatbot is building the stories, right? So when we build the chatbot, sometimes our story is not fully developed. After 6 months, maybe 8 months, we figure out we have 100 more user story. But what happened to the previous 40 user story when we change the intent or entities, So how we can take care of such a painful problem that we have to go each and every user story to change the intent? Is there any better way to take care of this?
I think having a good platform that you can call your central source of truth is very much key here. I think there's definitely risks with trying to spread out too much information. Like with teams, there has to be a separation of what's using and some of the perspectives, but at the same time, there should be a careful process of figuring out the right ways to make sure that the stories are consistent by really holding it like in one central spot and sort of continuously like iterating on even that piece of it. We can save a lot of time and just making sure that all of that comes together.
Thinking about dialogue management, and with so many tools out there like Dialogflow and Rasa, is there still an argument to be made for a custom build application for dialogue management? Yeah, like would anybody still write the code to manage the dialogue outside of the NLU to figure out like what the response is going to be, or would you recommend that everyone just uses something out of the box like Rasa or Dialogflow?
Well, I probably have a contrarian view, but I believe that all these dialogue flows suck, and it will make just a glorified IVR that only natural language understanding is the way to go. Everything else is IVR in disguise. So this is basically makes the point moot. However, if you want to do some dialogue management, it's easy to code it manually, but you don't need all these tools because it's kind of simple state machine. Any second whatever sophomore computer science student can try to program of this 20 steps. You don't need a tool for this. The real difficult part is natural language understanding. And
Okay, so I think to your point, there's definitely a place for, I think, Dialog Builder and dialogue management system. However, what we see is it's a great place to start, right? So when you design, interactively work with your user and customer, design your chatbot, use these dialogue flow designers to prototype it. I think Boss Society was here earlier, and they're a good tool, and we have a tool as well for prototyping that. But you also want to pick a tool that can allow you to just totally customize the dialogue experience. Once you build the initial dialogue, you want to be able to go back in and essentially as a coder to be able to add all the branching conditions and adding all the custom logic you want to do that. So my perspective, yeah, there's definitely a place for a lot of the initial designing and creation, but then to really refine it, you really need a tool that also allows you to get to the underlying code to really get the dialogue experience that you wanted.
Thank you very much. Can you give a round of applause for the panel, Zero to Launch?